My name's Michael Scott Moore. I was captured by pirates.
My condition isn't very good. I'm not very healthy. I haven't eaten in 2 days.
My whole world collapsed. You will probably receive a call, possibly asking for ransom.
I was surrounded by young, unpredictable men with guns.
The ransom demands got obscenely high.
$20 million, and within 24 hours in order to get your son free.
I was ready for desperate measures. I was living in Berlin, and I worked as a journalist for Spiegel Online. So for most of 2011, I was traveling from Berlin up to Hamburg, and I started to cover the trial of 10 Somali pirates. It was the first time any pirate was in front of a German judge in over 400 years. That was a historic trial at the time. It's hard to emphasize exactly how unique it was to have pirates active again in the world. I was hoping to write a book about that case in particular and get some deep background in Somalia itself. I met another journalist named Ashwin Rahman, who was a documentary journalist, and he had been in and out of war zones, including parts of Somalia, for about 20 years with his camera. So when we decided that we might go to Somalia together, the trial introduced me to some people who could lead journalists through that part of the world. Ashwin and I started to make plans to go to research background on the trial.
Somalia was really reaching its apex in terms of piracy attacks. It had started in the early 2000s and built up to a pretty significant point where obscene demands of money were being made, largely as a result of unprofessional, ill-disciplined negotiations taking place, which increase the price of ransoms exponentially. But it was, again, a dangerous, lawless place, a failed state, and shipping vessels and cargo ships going through the straits there were subject to regular attack.
Ashwin and I were fairly careful about setting up security and making plans. We were headed for central Somalia, towards a part of Somalia that was actually fairly well trodden by journalists. We knew that it was dangerous. That was not a question. We had security engaged to go out to Hobyo, which is a pirate town on the coast, under pirate control. And that was going to be the most dangerous part of the trip. We were going to interview a pirate boss there, and then we were going to come back. I thought I was going to be back within 2 weeks and be back to covering the trial in Hamburg.
When Michael first told me that he was going to go to Somalia, I was just absolutely against it. I thought it would be much too risky. It was not a safe country. And I tried to talk him out of it, and so did other people also. But being my son and, being stubborn, he went after all, and he did assure me that he had a good security team assembled together with his fellow journalists who had been to Somalia before. I asked him to send me periodic messages so that I could be assured that he was safe.
Galkayo Airport is like a bus station. It's not very big. And you land, and it's not the most secure place on earth, and a lot of things are happening, and of course you try and get through immigration, which is just a folding table, and the guy behind the folding table wants some extra money for your visa, and you didn't even know you needed a regional visa. These things are normal. Our security met us there at the airport. It was about 3 different SUVs full of young men with guns. We felt very welcomed by the clan. We went to Hobyo to find out a little bit more about what these pirate regions were like and to interview a pirate boss. It was a very tense interview. He was a very humorless man, and he kept his face wrapped. He didn't let us see anything besides his eyes. He sort of stepped in very weightily, you know, and he sat down and told us one big reason for their actions was to defend the Somali coastline against illegal fishing, against foreigners coming in and taking their fish. This behavior of going out to control illegal fishing, which had been going on since the 90s, had graduated up a step. So in other words, once Somali gunmen were catching container ships or massive freighters and holding them with guns, then it was no longer about fishing, it was about money.
These people assumed that the reason why the Somali pirates were doing what they were doing it was about the fishing rights off the coast of Somalia. But as the years progressed, these were no longer fishermen disgruntled that their territorial waters were being emptied by foreign fishing vessels. These were organized criminal gangs looking to make obscene and very large amounts of money from foreign companies and individuals who were sailing ships off the coast.
The messages were very short. He would tell me where he was located or where he was going. And I can't remember exactly how many days he had been there. I think it was 12. And he was about to leave in about 2 days later. And that's when I thought, well, so far so good. And maybe I can relax a little bit, but apparently I couldn't.
I still had some footwork I wanted to do, but Ashwin decided to change his plans and go to Mogadishu. That morning, our security failed to show up, and our guide, Somali elder named Mohammed Gerlach, got on the phone to the president, and the president sent his own car, and we went in the president's car to the airport with one gunman, so with reduced security. When Ashwin had flown off, I got back in the car with Mohammed Gerlach, Hamid, his lieutenant, essentially, and our gunman, our driver, into the president's car, and we drove back from the airport into Galkayo. And that's when my luck ran out. Between the airport and the city is a dusty road. It's well-traveled, but it's a dusty road. And about halfway through, the driver paused and said, oh, there's an unknown kind of technical. And a technical that is a battle wagon. It's just a Toyota flatbed with a cannon welded into the back. And it noticed us and pulled up so that cannon was aimed right through the windshield. And that essentially overpowered our gunman. He didn't fire a shot. And then about a dozen guys got off the flatbed holding Kalashnikovs and came to my side of the car. Still, your mind tries to say, okay, if it's a traffic stop, I've got my backpack, I've got my German passport, I can, no problem. That lasted about 2 seconds, and they fired into the air and like, on. They came over to my door, opened it. I tried to hold it shut. They beat on my wrist with their Kalashnikovs. They broke my wrist. They pulled me out. I was wearing glasses at the time. They knocked the glasses off my face. They trampled those in the dust. They took my backpack. They ripped my clothes. They beat my head with their rifles. And then they bundled me into an SUV that was waiting off in the dust. And so, sort of bleeding and blind, they stuffed me into the back, and we went bouncing over the Somali bush for about 3 hours. I think they had GPS, so drove intentionally away from anything. We didn't follow a trail or anything as far as I could tell either. We just bounced until we got to a camp. At the camp, there was a new set of pirates, and I was slightly aware that there were other hostages there, but I was confused, I was blind, I didn't have my glasses. All I knew was that the pirates wanted me to sit down on kind of a foam mattress that was waiting at the base of sort of a sandstone cliff there. These people had been waiting for me. The whole thing had been quite well planned. I had been trying to figure out exactly who had captured me. So the question was, had my own hosts turned on me, or had an outside group of pirates come to get me? I was getting nothing from those pirates. They weren't telling me a thing. They just wanted to make sure I had no phones on me or cameras or anything like that. I was obviously very angry, but I was surrounded by young men with guns, not just men with guns, but unpredictable men with guns. So I wasn't sure how much I could get away with. We woke up in the morning and there was the rumbling of a car, and a car showed up to take us away. So all of a sudden I was in the backseat of the car with two hostages. They were two fishermen from the Seychelles, and they had been captive for about 3 months. One of them was named Rolly Tambara, and he became my friend, my best friend. And his friend was Marc Sangwar. They were both in Rolly's boat out near the Seychelles. And then Rolly and Marc and I spent about 4 days in a prison house, a filthy house on the edge of Hobyo.
It was a Saturday morning. Out of my kitchen window, I saw like 5 men getting out of a car dressed in suits and looking into my window, and I thought, what is that? And then I hear the knock on the door, and they are standing in front of my door telling me that Michael had been kidnapped. My whole world collapsed. They did not have a lot of information except that Michael was kidnapped. And they were kind of letting me know what I could possibly expect. You will probably receive a call from pirates and, possibly asking for ransom. They assured me to keep me informed about any information they would get. And of course, I could not even apprehend any of it because it was just, my brain was just scrambled.
After a few days, a Somali came up to us where we had our mattresses spread out and said, "Come, we're gonna make a phone call." So I went up the bluff with the gunman, and there were two Somali pirate bosses sitting on top of kind of cross-legged on top of the bluff. One had a pistol, the other had a phone, and he handed me the phone and he said, "Call somebody." So I dialed the only phone number that I knew by heart, which was Mom's. I got her on the phone, and I could tell from her early questions that she had already been prepared.
And Michael called and said, this is Omar here with me. They're requesting $20 million and within 24 hours in order to get your son free. And I'm just so astonished. I didn't know what to say. I mean, where am I going to get $20 million? And of course, the US government does not pay any ransom. So I was on my own.
The US government, similar to the UK government, do not pay ransoms to proscribed terrorist organizations because they believe it funds terrorism which can actually be used against their own interests. Michael's mother would have been advised, actually, don't rush to the finish here. Now that can sound quite counterintuitive because as a loved one, you want to get your son, daughter back as soon as possible. But we've found that if you agree to demands too easily, too readily, and you pay unreasonably high amounts, actually you're going to extend the amount of time that the hostage is going to be held and potentially increase the risk to them.
It was incredible to hear my mom's voice, and that was very overwhelming. I could also tell that she was emotional. I mean, I could tell that she was scared. This was such a tense phone call. We both thought that everything was riding on the phone call. The bosses told me to demand $20 million and to say that if they didn't get it within 3 days, within 72 hours, then the pirates were going to starve me. They wanted me and they wanted my family and friends to sweat. The pirates did cut off food and water, but by the end of that day, I think they gave us dinner. So we knew that that was an empty threat.
At that period in the 2000s, the ransom demands had just gotten out of all proportion. They'd got obscenely high, and I think that led itself to the kidnappers having an overinflated and unrealistic expectation of what hostages were worth. And it goes to the point that having discipline and focus and a clear strategy in your negotiations is paramount to prevent unreasonably high amounts being paid. Because counterintuitively, that can actually put the lives of the hostages at even more risk because it raises the expectations in the minds of the kidnappers.
So in those first 3 months, let's say from January to April, they left Mark behind and they took me and Rolly out into the bush and then sometimes back into Hobyo and into some horrible rundown prison house or another. And always we seemed to move in a hurry because of aerial surveillance. The aerial surveillance was new to Rolly. So Rolly said, you know, we've spent 3 months here in Somalia. We haven't heard anything like these planes, and these planes keep us moving. We think they're here for you. I'm like, I think so too. The pirates certainly thought so, and every time there was the sound of a plane or the sighting of a drone, sometimes they saw a drone, they got really upset. And normally we would break camp and move like in a hurry.
In the early stages of Michael being taken, he was moved around a lot, taken from safe house to safe house and location to location. And that's quite a common tactic because in those early days, the kidnappers are at risk potentially of being discovered. So they want to make it as hard as possible for the eventual safe house, the eventual stronghold to be discovered. Plus, it disorientates the hostage. So they really lose track of where they're being held, which then minimizes their desire to potentially escape.
At the end of March, we were back in Hobyo, living in a ruin, and we had to go out to go to the bathroom among the rocks. And whenever we did that, towards the end of March, we started to notice there was a ship anchored off Hobyo. In the middle of April, they drove us by night onto the beach at Hobyo and took us by skiff out to the ship, a longliner for tuna called the Naham 3. 28 other kids on the ship were also hostage. So we joined the hostage crew from that day. That was mid-April, and we stayed there for the whole summer of 2012. It was anchored about 1 mile off Hobyo, so we could look back from the ship. It was sitting at anchor, straining in a very strong current that was moving northward along the Somali coast. The food on board the ship was great. There was still food from their tour in the kitchen, frozen vegetables and frozen meat, plenty of rice. There were, of course, something like 100 tons of frozen tuna in the hold. Most of that 50-meter ship was a freezer. When the pirates took over the ship out in the middle of the ocean, of course they came on with guns blazing. They went to the bridge almost immediately, and the first person they shot was the captain. So the captain was dead, and he was in the freezer. We were mistreated, but not regularly, so it wasn't systematic. It was just every now and then. There was one boss named Ali Dulai, who we saw quite a bit at the beginning, and he slugged me a few times. The worst treatment, though, happened on land. And there was one point in May, so weeks after we first came on board, where we were taken back to Hobyo, spent the night in some horrible house with Mark, he was there. And then we drove out into the woods. It was almost like a summit meeting of pirate bosses. They brought me over to this place in the woods, and the first thing I saw was Rolly dangling upside down from a branch. So they tied a rope to Rolly's ankles, and they hung him upside down, and they beat him with sticks. So they tortured him. They tortured him for the sake of a camera, which they sent the film then to the Seychelles. and to frighten me. I mean, it was a reminder, as if I needed one, that I was in the presence of evil. I was afraid that they were going to do something like that to me. I was also aware that they were putting on a show. We then did a proof of life video, and that's the video where I'm wearing the silly blanket.
First, how's your condition?
My condition isn't very good. I'm not very healthy. I haven't eaten in 2 days, and I only get bread and water occasionally.
I almost said, you can probably tell from my wardrobe, but that my conditions are terrible. I kind of wish I had made that joke, but I decided to play it straight.
The first video was devastating. He looked very thin, and he looked so emaciated. His eyes didn't look right. The FBI came by and said, well, look at the video, it's staged. It's made to really scare you, to intimidate. It doesn't look like he's helpless, and he did remember some of the dates and the time. His mind was still clear, but it was just unbelievably scary.
I'm terrified.
Okay, then what you are requesting for your government?
I have to request from the American or the German government the full ransom.
Proof of life videos are absolutely fundamental to the success of a negotiation. They prove that the hostages are alive and relatively well, albeit the caveat there is they're only alive and well on the date that the photo was taken or the video recorded. And in Michael's case, what it did, it demonstrated to his family and to the government and to others that actually he's been relatively well looked after, he is alive and well, and we want to progress this. It's a sign that we want to progress the negotiations, and these are our demands. And at the moment, your loved one is alive and well. But unless you pay money, we can't necessarily guarantee that that's always going to be the case.
I contacted the State Department. They were not helpful at all because there was no government in Somalia, so they felt like they had no room for negotiation. They had no contacts for negotiation. You know, I felt so helpless so many times. I'd wake up in the middle of the night trying to think of ways how I could raise a large sum of money, and you know, it takes a long time.
So we spent the summer on the Nahum 3. One thing that started to happen during that summer was regular visits from a surveillance plane. And the first day it happened, the plane came low next to the ship so that I could get a good look at it. Nothing on it, except maybe a cameraman. So it was not there to rescue me. It was not there to fire weapons at the, or even threaten the ship. We had been circled a couple of times by military helicopters, so I knew the difference there. At that point in the summer, if I had seen another military helicopter, I would have jumped. And I think I had even said so on the phone.
At first, I thought, well, if he tries to escape, but that was probably not such a good idea because he had lost his glasses in the scuffle when he was taken. And I thought, well, you know, I don't think he can capture a vehicle, or, you know, because he cannot see enough to drive. And but I thought, you know, with all these guards around, with all these machine guns, I was worried all the time that, you know, somebody would just do something crazy.
I was ready for desperate measures. I'm a surfer, I can swim. We were only a mile from shore. Nobody thought that I could swim. Pirates can't swim, by the way. Pirates are not nautical people, at least not in Somalia, they're gunmen. Pirates don't think other people can swim. I was ready to jump off the ship. So that night I thought that there isn't going to be much other opportunity. We're on the deck, it's dark, the ship is moving, the other hostages are kind of playing cards on the deck. And I see this guy with no gun standing there on the deck. He's the only Somali on that at that level of the deck. There's some gunmen up above. My great fear, of course, is getting shot when I jump, but I'm like, well, it's now or never. So I kicked off my sandals and I made a running leap for the side of the ship, and I jumped. Best swim of my life. I had eyeballed the direction of the swell. It was at an angle to the rear of the ship. I knew to swim with it. I wanted to swim like a dolphin, kind of at the surface, but below it. I did not want to be seen. I did not want to be shot. I wanted to get away from this ship as quickly as possible. And when the ship was going like that, and the angle of the swell was like that, I was 100 yards away within a minute. Nobody fired a shot. There was a lot of shouting. And there were searchlights. So all of a sudden, I was out in the dark water, which, by the way, was not only warm, but very salty, so more buoyant than I expected. It was the saltiest ocean I've ever been in. Beautiful. I mean, wonderful to be out there. And big swells, so I could kind of hide from the searchlights behind these mounds of water. I expected the ship, because it had this rumbling engine that didn't sound too good, to keep moving. I'd not expected to make a U-turn, and it didn't. Instead, it stalled on that swell, and it started to roll back towards me. And any surfer knows that a larger craft on a swell is going to move faster than a smaller craft. I could try and outrun the vessel to shallow water or something, or I could evade, and I evaded for a little while, and eventually, to avoid getting keel hauled by all the barnacles on the hull of the ship, I had to give up. I was probably quite delusional. I was in the mood for final efforts. I was willing to die. When the men on board got together and put a life preserver on the end of a rope and threw that into the water, I grabbed it and realized I had to have a reason to give to the pirates. I had not thought of an excuse or anything like that. But when I got to the deck, I had my excuse, which was I didn't want to get sold to Al-Shabaab. I mean, when we were out there on land in May, and Rolly was getting tortured, and I was talking to Mohammed Garfanji. Garfanji had said, the next time you come on land, we will sell you to Al-Shabaab. By the time I was back on the deck, I had my excuse ready-made, thanks to Mohammed Garfanji. I said I didn't want to be sold to Al-Shabaab. My reasoning caused a rift in the pirate gang. So they beat me as punishment, but then there was an argument between two sides of the pirate gang about how I should be treated and how I should be kept. I was in solitary confinement for the next 3 weeks. Had to stay in my cabin, couldn't mingle with anybody outside. About 3 weeks after I jumped, this is all in the month of September in 2012, a bunch of pirates I did recognize came from shore and placed me down onto the skiff and then sort of packed me in, right? 10 pirates with guns and Michael in the middle. They did not want me to jump again. And that was the last I saw of the Nahum 3. But of course, now I was on land. The food sucked, it was hot, there were flies, there were mosquitoes. And within 2 months of coming on land, I had malaria.
Always I'm going, how can anybody survive in this kind of environment and being by themselves and, not being treated well, not being fed well, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to even talk to the International Red Cross for a package to send, but they said, no, Somalia is way too dangerous a country. We're not going in there. And it was just everything, was worrisome. It went on, and I could do nothing to help.
In January of 2013, so 1 year on from my capture, I had a phone call with my mom. And I thought that a year on, that was a perfectly good time to set me free. And the pirates were very encouraging of that sentiment. So I thought that this was going to be a monumental phone call. At some point, my mom said, we're not close. We're still in the millions. We're still far apart. I'm sorry. And I was just devastated. I sank into a different level of, desperation at that point. That phone call was the last I had for about a year and a half. I didn't know it was going to be that long, and it took a few months before the pirates actually said they were doing it on purpose. They said, we want to make sure that your mother pays before you hear from her again. And it was horrible. I mean, you get used to it. I think in that first year, I must have had 9 phone calls, or half dozen at least. And then all of a sudden, nothing.
One of the most powerful tactics that kidnappers have is the power of silence. And they will do this regularly to exert pressure, in this case on Michael's mom, so she would be thinking the worst, that he may be really ill or he would have been killed. And this is a standard tactic from the kidnappers' playbook. And they do it just to exert as much pressure as possible.
There was a time when I did not talk to Michael at all. I always asked for proof of life continuously, and many times they would just say, no, you need to send money first before we let you talk to him. The pirates would not come off the $20 million demand until about, I think it was 2 years later. And all of a sudden, they were coming down to about maybe 6 million. Then they were 4.5 million. Then they were up to 5 million again. And I had raised more money, and finally I had 1.6 million. And I said, that's pretty much it. I cannot raise any more family and friends, and I have done as much as I can. And they said, no, that's not enough.
Michael's mom took up the most unenviable position, and that is to negotiate for the release of her son. And as a parent, it can't get much more traumatic than that. But what she did, she was able to regulate her own emotions effectively, and that is the #1 skill of all the top negotiators in the world. The final amount that is agreed between the kidnappers and the family or the company or the government is largely dependent on what they are willing and able to pay. And Michael's mom had exhausted all avenues, all means of raising any more funds, and the 1.6 million that she managed to raise was the maximum available to her. But in every single kidnapping case, it is about managing the expectations of the kidnappers that they're not going to get anywhere near their initial demand. So there has to be that management expectations, and reality kicks in terms of the amount of money that is available.
It was about 3 months or so before Michael's release that a new negotiator, somebody that was recommended to me, and he had just negotiated the release of 3 Kenyans out of Somalia, and he offered his help. I was very grateful because I was getting very exhausted. He, being a male, probably helped also because he would be a little bit more forceful.
There was a new negotiator named Bob, who I recognized his voice by this point, but I didn't know who he was. And then on the morning of September 23rd in 2014, one of the pirate translators came to me with a cell phone and handed it to me and said, "Here is Bob." Okay, I'll talk to Bob. And Bob said, "Michael, have the pirates explained to you what's about to happen?" And I said, "No." And the pirate went, "Proof of life only," and he hung up the phone. Okay. Then after that, he said, "You were going free." Okay, sure.
finally, the pirates agreed to the amount, and we found a pilot that would go into Somalia in order to fly Michael out. He had done this before. We still were very apprehensive about, sending all that money, making sure that Michael goes free, because it has happened that, ransom was paid and the hostage was still not freed.
We could all hear the iron gates of the compound open up, sort of clang, and a car come in. It was always a bad sound to have those gates clang open because your life was about to change as a hostage. And I didn't like it. And my guard outside the bathroom said, "Michael, your Gotti," which means car. Essentially, "Michael, your car is here." Like, whatever. These cars normally came in the middle of the night. The middle of the day was very strange. I came back into the room. They said, "Pack up your things." I'm like, "No." Some other people came in from the car, including a sack of money, bundled $100 bills. Like, I don't even know if those are real. "Michael, you're going free." I'm like, either that or you're selling me on to another, group. I'm not going to get my hopes up. And then one by one, the guards came to shake my hand and say goodbye. Like, oh, okay, this is different. They said, "We're going to take you in the car to the airport." Whatever. I guess I'll pack. Okay, fine, I'll pack.
The pilot flew in. We were on the phone with several people, and we heard that Michael was on its way to the airport.
And then they said, "Okay, you're going to go out and get in the car, but here's the thing. We're not going to take you to the airport. We're going to take you out to the bush and give you to another group of Somalis." I said, "Aha, see? I'm not going free. You." They put me in the car. Instead of being packed in by gunmen, 2 guys in the car, one of them could speak English, maybe one gun visible. We drove out into the bush, not very far. A white car pulls up. There's a very high-ranking pirate in the passenger seat. He got out and got into the car with the pirates who had delivered me. I got out and got into the car with the driver. And the driver seemed to be very happy to see me. And he said, "You're going free." I said, "Oh, I guess." And he said, so he took out a phone and he dialed my mother's number. And it was her and Bob on the other end of the phone.
I got a call. He was on the phone, and I said, "Michael, you're going free." So his voice changed immediately. And so that was the happiest day of my life.
Then I got into another car and drove to the same airport where I said goodbye to Ashwin 2 years and 8 months beforehand. And there was exactly one plane at the airport, and it was a Cessna. A man stepped out of that and took my picture as I got out of the SUV, and he said, "These are for your mother." I said, "You must be Derek." He said, "Yeah." We closed the doors of the plane, and the plane started to move, and Derek got on the radio to the tower and said, Galkayo Tower, 2 souls on board." Which is... Excuse me. That's still... I didn't even react like this at the time, excuse me. It's just a manner of speaking for the pilot of the plane, but it strikes me as a very eloquent phrase. 2 souls on board, clearance to take off. There was like no response for 5 minutes. And it was just sort of quick, comical. Where are the guys in the tower? They were like chewing cod or something. Finally, they said, "Yes, okay, take off. There's no other planes in the on the airstrip. Go ahead, So finally, we had our clearance and we took off, and then I was free.
So when the plane took off, what a relief. After 2 years and 4 months or 6 months.
I didn't feel safe until the wheels were off the runway. None of it was believable to me. You know, I wasn't going to allow myself to believe it until we were actually in the air. And it turns out that's the moment they were waiting for back in California too. Once they got to hear wheel, these phrases, man. Wheels up in Galkayo. That's when it was real. So and then once we were in the air, Derek said, "I know two of your friends." I said, "I'm sorry for being confused, but I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Well, Rolly and Mark." He said, "I flew them out too." So instantly, I learned that those guys were okay too. It was not like this in the plane, but it was a moment where I had been holding in so much all that time. It was just very emotional. It was great. It was great to hear the news about my friends.
His very first words were, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Well, don't be sorry, you're here now."
And I was aware that she was involved from start to finish because it was her voice I kept hearing on the phone. At the same time, I knew that between those phone calls, there were negotiations happening. I didn't know who was doing them. And so it was surprising to learn that my mom's was the voice that the pirates heard on the phone almost all the time, that she was the one doing the negotiating. You know, she was not always in the room with people who were telling her what to say. Just the amount of strength that she had to discover to do that is incredible.
It'll always be part of his life. And I'm amazed how well he has recuperated, and also mentally that how he has dealt with it and gotten on with his life. His health has improved over the years, and so I think he's coped extremely well.
I mean, the experience was obviously an encounter with death. It was also an encounter with evil. And so those things can't help but change you. Also, the realization that to get through it, I had to detach myself. If you dissociate from something that horrible that's happened to you, you eventually have to go back and reconnect to it. Detachment from feelings at the time it's a spiritual discipline. So.